of that. It was declared a national incident yesterday as for the first time in 40 years, traces of the polio virus were found in the UK after an evolved strain was discovered in sewage samples from London.
Well, we're joined now by Dr Julian Harriss from the British Polio Fellowship, along with our very own Dr Ellie Cannon, to explain a little bit more. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for being here. Dr Julian, if we could start with you first of all. Just explain a little bit about polio, because it's not been something that's been around us for a very long time. What is it?
No, I suppose polio has become the victim of our own successes in that we've essentially eradicated polio from most of the world. It still lingers wherever there's war, famine and refugees fleeing disruption, and when health services break down. It's a viral infection. It lands in the gut, usually, and it sits there for a few weeks. And in most people, almost everyone, it's totally harmless. It just passes through you. You never knew you had it. In a small number of people, typically kids, they'll have an infection which causes a fever. Sometimes they'll have a headache, and it can become quite disabling for a few days, but then the kid gets over it. But then in about 1 in 200 or so people, it will leave lasting paralysis. And that's what we see in people who had, in the epidemics of the 1950s, severe polio infections and were left with lifelong paralysis. So that's the illness of polio in a nutshell, which sadly has unfortunately not yet completely gone away.
So explain, I mean, it's remarkable that it was found. I mean, that in itself is a really very efficient screening programme for all of us. So well done to the team that found it. Explain what would have happened, how it was there, and what strain it is.
Right. Well, just a small correction. We do pick up polio virus in sewage samples in the global surveillance system around the world, including in the UK. Every year we pick up the odd sample of a tiny amount of virus. So that's to be expected, because in some parts of the world we're still using a form of vaccine which is on the sugar cube. And those older people who are watching will remember that you were given a sugar cube as a child. Do you remember that? And that's a live virus which sits in your gut for a few weeks. Your body makes antibodies to the virus and you're protected from that. The trouble is that wherever that's still used, it's not used in the UK, hasn't been used here for more than 20 years, but wherever that kind of vaccine is used, the virus tends to sit in the gut for a few weeks and it can mutate, and it very, very rarely mutates to a form that causes illness. So maybe 1 in a billion children who are given that sugar cube may get ill from the vaccine. And when a person comes to the UK, having recently had that vaccine on a sugar cube, they can still seed, well, basically poo out tiny amounts of the virus, which is what was picked up. The concern this time round, though, was that the 2 samples picked up earlier this year, when we analysed them, they suggested there might have been some transmission amongst the community in northeast London. There might have been some transmission between people in this way, no symptoms, no illness, but the virus might have found a few people to spread amongst themselves, maybe in a family or a small community.
And so how does it spread?
Typically, hands, fecal. It's very contagious. It's one of the most contagious viruses. It can be from sneezing, but generally, if you're living in close proximity to someone who has the virus and you're not protected, it's very likely that you'll also catch the virus.
So this alert that was put out sounds extremely alarming for something that you are saying it would appear to be, and we'll talk about vaccinations and our vaccinations in just a moment, something that is controllable, something that is not necessarily something we should worry about, but then you have this alert.
Yeah, this is one of the situations where the possible bad outcomes are devastating, but the risk is very, very low. So at this stage, we should consider this to be a warning, and we should be very grateful, as you said, for the efficiency of the surveillance systems that we have in the UK and throughout the world. In fact, it was so sensitive that we can actually pick up which part of London this is likely coming from. So for that, we can be very, very grateful. But we must now act. So this is the warning that says we must be sure that the population in London gets its vaccines right up to above 95%, and we're not there right now.
We're not there right now. In fact, we're at 90%, I think it is. So not far away, but it is, because I think people will be thinking, well, have I had it? Has my children had it? If this is going to affect children. So just explain who has had it.
OK, so anybody who's had a UK vaccination schedule in the last few years will be vaccinated against polio. So babies have vaccinations at 2, 3 and 4 months. That includes polio. Then you go back before your children start primary school for the preschool boosters. That has polio in it as well. Then as a teenager, people have their teenage boosters. That also has polio in it as well. So if you've had that normal UK course, or if you're older and you've had them sort of in the 70s or 80s, you would have had the sugar cube. But really, for the last 20 years, we've been putting it in the other childhood immunisations.
And so, what about people specifically in that sort of northeast London area? How concerned should they be and what action should they be taking?
OK, so I would say the first thing to do would be to check your vaccination status. So polio won't be called a polio vaccine in your red book or on the card. It might be called something like IPV, 3-in-1, 4-in-1, 5-in-1, even 6-in-1. That will all include polio, so check that. If you don't know or you can't see on a record, ask your GP surgery. We've got it all computerised, we can tell you. And if you are not vaccinated, GP surgeries will vaccinate you, particularly children, but also adults.
And if your child or your babies haven't quite finished their vaccination programme yet, are they still covered by what they have had? Or should
they're covered enough. They haven't had a full course, so they're not sort of 100% covered. Obviously, no vaccinations are 100% anyway, but if they've had at least their primary course, they are covered enough. And as Julian said, at the moment, the risk is low. So if people are surrounded, if babies are surrounded by adults and other children who are fully vaccinated and they're not living in a home that's risk, then their risk will be low. But the vaccination is the answer.
Julian, as we've seen over the past couple of years, there are people who are extremely nervous about having vaccines, and not just the COVID vaccine, and we've tried to dispel the concern so many times here. People still remain. Some sections of the community are very wary and mistrustful. What do you say to them if they're thinking, look, I'm gonna weather this storm, and I don't trust the vaccines, and so therefore I'm not gonna bother?
OK, I'll say to them this. In the UK, where we use the injection, and it's the virus particles that we inject, not a live virus, it's completely safe. So the risk of having polio is low, but it's vastly higher than the risk of any side effects from having the injection. It's really important that we do that. Now, I've run the expert panel of the British Polio Fellowship for many years, and I witnessed what happens to people who've had polio all of their lives. It's horrible.
Thank you both. We'll see where this goes. Lovely to have you both here today.